Hello, and we're back. Sorry, we had some internet issues there, and I dropped off, and then it managed to boot everybody out, so we had to just start over. So, Melissa was in the middle of her next Not Awesome, I believe, and so we'll start there and keep going. Melissa.
All right, so I was talking about the Calgary Mammoth game, and Calgary is one of those teams, and it's been repeated several times, like historically. Doesn't matter how they play during the regular season, when they're in the playoffs, it's like they're a different team. They're just more aggressive, they're sharper, they're just really hard to beat. Just like the Mammoths seem to do the opposite. They've had really great seasons, and then they go into the playoffs, and you're like, wait a sec, this isn't the same team. What's going on? And so going into this, you cannot take that quarter off. You really can't. And I've complained about it all season. I've complained about it probably the last 4 or 5 seasons. The Mammoth have to play 4 quarters, and I understand it's hard. These guys are athletes, though they're professional. I don't know what happened during halftime because Calgary came out and they were fired up. I don't know what was said in that locker room, but they came out and they were ready to play, and they knew what was going to happen. They were going to win this. And then the Mammoth came out. And I know even John Gallant had commented on one point that the defense was not playing well and that the team was not clicking. So I don't know what happened in that locker room, but it was like they switched jerseys or something, because the same teams did not come out in the second half that were there in the first half. And so it's very frustrating to me because you look at these weird stats, like Colorado is now 0-8 or 1-8 against Calgary in the playoffs. Okay, different coaching staff, different players. Why is this stat still relevant and occurring? Like, there's no factual basis for it. And yet, the Mammoth go into the playoffs and they're one and done again. They've only really made it past, the first round once, maybe twice, and only the finals once in all their years. So very frustrating. So that would be my next Not Awesome. And now that we have Graham back, I know he did have some extra points on that penalty shot. So let's go back to him real quick.
All right. The penalty shot thing, I did understand what you guys were saying, in that allowing anybody to take the shot is even more of a deterrent than just this was what was going to happen and you guys wrecked it, so we're going to put it the way it was, which I guess makes some sense, but it's also, well, you shouldn't have taken that away. So as a penalty, not only will we put it back the way it was, but we'll allow them to change players if they want. So as a further deterrent, I guess that makes sense. And it's also possible that the rule was written for the more usual case from what we see, and that's somebody gets a penalty shot because of a third minor when they're already down by 2, in which case there wasn't necessarily a specific person who had a breakaway, or if you get a too many men call with less than 2 minutes in the game, or an overtime, that's an immediate penalty shot. So in that case, it makes total sense that the coach can pick whoever he wants. So in the case where you actually have a player with a breakaway who's taken down from behind, that's actually, I think, the less often case. So maybe the rule applies to the other cases, and in this case, it's just adds, like you said, as more of a deterrent. So I'm okay with that explanation. My next actual Not Awesome was the feed from Rochester on Friday night did not work. I was kind of paying attention to Twitter a little bit just to kind of watch what was going on in the game. But I guess the feed on NLL TV didn't start till 5 or 6 minutes into it. May not have been quite that long, but it was several minutes anyway into the game before anybody could see anything. So they were just following on Twitter as well. And I think this was mostly on Facebook, a little bit on Twitter, but mostly on Facebook was where I was seeing all these complaints. And that seems to be typical. I'll get back to that in a minute. But the people complaining about it were just losing their minds. Now, I totally understand you're a Rochester fan or you're a New England fan and you want to watch this game because it's one and done. It's the playoffs. It's a big deal. I get that. So is it frustrating? Sure. Have we complained about this a million times before? Yes, we have. And do people have a right to complain? Well, sure they do, because they're paying for this service. And it's a meaningful game and they want to watch it. But the people who are saying this is absolutely the worst thing that has ever happened, this shows that this is a completely incompetent league that can't do anything right. The commissioner needs to be fired. Let's not lose our minds over this. It's something that needs to be fixed and something that's certainly they're working on and all that sort of thing. But the commissioner is in the process of changing all these things. He's already announced all kinds of changes to the video streaming and the packages that are going to be available and all that kind of stuff. We already know that's changing next season. So why call to fire the commissioner now because this one didn't work? So yeah, I mean, you want to complain about it. That's fine, but let's not get like silly about it. That was my not awesome. Just seeing people completely lose their mind and blow things all out of proportion. So Tyler, you're next.
Speaking of losing their mind and blowing things out of proportion, I'm of the opinion after last night's game that Colorado should fire Pat Coyle and Chris Gill and Dan Stroop. So there's your hot take. They've been there. I think this is their third season they've been to the playoffs. They joined halfway through one season, so I don't know if that was it. But the end result of having them come in and coach the team is that they're no better than they were before. They're not getting over the hump of beating Calgary. This is professional sports. Being good enough isn't enough. They need to win, go deep in the playoffs, show progress to keep their jobs. That's what I feel about it. Like, it's not even my team. And I'm like, well, they're not doing a good enough job. They do then come back to the standard issue with every time there's an NLL coaching opening of like, who do you get who's better? And I don't have a clear answer for that. The one that would be really interesting is, could they get Andy McBride to come in and be the coach that beats the team he spent his career with? Could he change up whatever they need to get them over this Calgary hump? Could he know something enough about Calgary to say, this is what we have to do in the one playoff game that matters after this whole season? That would be pretty amazing to watch. And then you extend this out further, and barring a miracle, Calgary will be in the same spot next week. We'll be here saying, well, does everybody just concede to the rush? Like, is that good enough? Or do they need to try and change something to get over that hurdle and just not be playing for second place, or consistently playing for third place in Mammoth, or consistently playing for fourth place as the Stealth had the last three of the last 4 years? It's not a deep field with a lot of choices, but where do you hold somebody accountable? And I literally woke up this morning and so I was like, yeah, like it's a hot take. It's in the moment. The game just happened yesterday, but you brought in the three-headed beast, as they were originally called. You put Coyle in charge, and they've given you exactly what you already had. And is that good enough or not? And being professional sports, I think that's not good enough. Like, they need to improve, not just consistently do the same. So there is my not awesome. And you can have all sorts of feels about it. Melissa, do you have another?
I don't, but I do have comments on that not awesome. It's kind of hard not to, since that is my team. I would say that they're not where they were because under the previous leadership, we had actually missed our first ever playoff game. So I would say that we have improved. Still haven't improved where I would prefer us to be. As I've complained about all season, they don't like to play four quarters. There's a lot of times where the defense doesn't seem to be communicating to one another. The offense doesn't seem to be communicating. I feel like with the retirement of a specific player, that has helped some, because just like when we had Gary Gate, it felt like too often plays were forced through that player that really shouldn't have been, and didn't matter if that player had four guys on him, it was still forced through him. So not having those really big name players is actually kind of a good thing. We do still have a couple good, big name players, but it's not quite the same. I think we had some big injuries. There was definitely some cohesive issues. So I would say one more season. If they don't improve, because they didn't look great this season, I would say half of why the Mammoth ended up looking as good as they did was because the other teams were playing worse, not because the Mammoths were playing well. But if after next season, if we see the same result or worse, then yeah, let's get somebody different in. But as Tyler said, who's out there? The player pool is pretty big. Goalie pool is a little smaller, but then the coaching staff, you're probably going to be having untested coaches, which isn't always a bad thing. I mean, Pat Coyle, Dan Stroop, and Chris, and I just drew a blank.
Yeah.
Thank you. Getting over a headache today. So it was one of those things, like they were untested in this parameter. And initially they came in and there wasn't a designated coach. They were all three, which, as we had talked about, that was going to have to change at some point because you can't have three co-leaders. You can try, but at some point, everything has to go through one person. It's just the way it really is. You're not going to have three CEOs, So it made sense. But I think they're on the right track. I saw a lot of things I really liked this season compared to the previous seasons. So I have a more positive outlook, even though this is the end result that I expected, which sucks because it doesn't matter how good the Mammoths seem to play. It just, they get to the playoffs and all of a sudden it's like a switch is flipped. But, it's one of those things. I really feel like the only reason we made it past and made it to the Cup in 2006 is because Chris Levis. Because G. Nash, who had been our star goalie and was awesome, and I still adore G. Nash. He was a great goalie. Come playoffs, he would fall apart. And Chris Levis really wasn't, a great guy, great goalie. He really wasn't a starter. But he could come in some of those clutch moments and pull us through. And that's what he did that year. And we won the Cup. And it was just awesome. It was amazing. We haven't had another season like that. So the chemistry was there. Everything that you wanted was there. So I would definitely disagree. Long story now. But no, I don't think you fire the coaches yet. What about you, Graham? Do you have any not awesomes, or did you want to touch on that little hot point?
Yeah, I don't have any particular insight on that. I will say that it's not unlikely that Jamie Batley might be available for coaching, which I think Tyler may be getting to in a couple of minutes. But yeah, I don't have any more insight on that. I think if I were a Mammoth fan, it certainly is frustrating that you seem to have some really great regular seasons and then hit Calgary and stop, and some sort of mediocre regular seasons and make it to the playoffs anyway and hit Calgary and stop. And it's that seems to be the wall. And if you switch coaches and change your lineups and make all kinds of changes and you still end up with the same result, it can get frustrating. Yeah, so I don't have any more insight on that. So I'm gonna go back to Tyler, I guess, for the next one.
Okay. Yeah, my next one's right in the same vein of how is Jamie Batley still employed as the stealth coach? The comparison I have in my mind right now is the NFL, where when the regular season ends, the bad coaches get fired that night or the following Monday. Like, they play the games on Sunday if you, whatever reason, you're living in a cave. So Sunday the games happen. Sunday night, coaches start getting fired through Monday, and it's been a week, and Jimmy Batley is still employed as the stealth head coach, as far as I can tell. And my problem is, like, it doesn't send a message to the fans that, hey, we're going to address this problem. Like, no, we're going to sit back and look and evaluate the problem. I think you have your results. I think that further evaluation, I don't know what you would gain from it. It could be sitting back and to see if some team makes a move. Like if Colorado got that crazy idea that I have, honestly, I would take Coyle and crew in Vancouver. Like they're better than what we had. It appears to be better than what we have. So maybe they're just waiting to see if anybody's going to do anything. Or Calgary again, like you know what, Mulaski, you keep getting us to playoffs, but you missed last year. You never beat the Rush in the playoffs. You're out. Well, South could bring in Mulaski, but right now maybe they're just waiting for that stuff to settle down. But they could do that without a coach. They could just have an empty vacancy for a couple weeks. The mean thing to say is, would it be any different than it was for the last 2 months? But at this point, I'd like to see some sort of action, even though it's the middle of the playoffs and maybe the NL has a ban on. There's so many maybes here. Like, and I was like, don't put anything up bad press. You can fire a coach in the summer, but this is our playoffs. This is our moment to look good. Well, you're just prolonging the inevitable. I don't want it. I want to know that change is being made in the positive direction. Melissa, do you have any more not awesomes?
My last not awesome isn't worth discussing, but I think it is interesting just to talk about coaching. Thanks, Jackson. Sorry. Big dogs be very distracting. I think maybe part of the reason that they haven't announced any changes is because, like we just discussed, who do you replace him with? And so maybe they're kind of looking at it as, well, he's at least an option until we can find something better. So they're maybe subtly looking versus making a big deal out of it. Because I don't think there's, well, maybe with our new commissioner, there is a ban on announcements like that. Because we did talk about when everything with the Rush went through and Bruce Urban's announcement beforehand and things like that. So yeah, there could definitely be some kind of a ban this season. I think we are going to see some changes in the off season. It's going to be interesting because we saw a lot of good and a lot of bad from the teams this season. And we always talk about how much parity there is in the league. And there still is, but there was a lot more inconsistency, I feel like, this season than we've seen in previous seasons. So I do think we're going to see some big changes, especially with, San Diego and then other teams down the line in the horizon. It could be just a situation of that. I don't know that the Mammoth will take that lead back. I mean, he was a good coach to begin with, but man, he was a yeller too. And I don't know that that's always a good coaching style. So it'll be interesting. Do you have any other not awesomes, Graham?
I do not. I think we're done with that section. Other than maybe the four Western teams. Well, not likely the four Western teams. I think Saskatchewan is probably happy with what they have, but maybe the other three Western teams will just sort of swap coaches, and Mulaski will go to Vancouver, and Batley will go to Colorado, and Coyle will go to Calgary, and we'll just kind of shuffle things around and see what happens that way.
It could happen because, as we've talked about before, a great head coach with the wrong team makes a bad team still. So we could see something as random as that.
All right, so let's move on to our award choices for 2018. We have each chosen our MVP, transition player, defender, and goalie and rookie of the year. So we've got each of those 5 awards. And so each of us will go through our choices and mention as to why you chose that person. It doesn't have to be in serious depth, but I also posted mine on my blog this past week. I will be posting our picks as well. So I've got some comments there. So I'll just go over mine briefly. So we'll start with MVP, I guess, and I'll go first since I'm already talking. My MVP for this year is Mark Matthews, and I almost didn't want to describe it like this because I don't want to take anything away from what Matthews has done this year. But unlike in a couple of previous years, like when Dane Smith had his outstanding year and when Sean Evans scored 130 points and Lyle Thompson last year, they were almost the runaway winner. Like you look, who's the MVP this year? Well, it's clearly that person. And I don't think there was one of those this year. And like I said, I don't want to take anything away from what the season Matthews had, which was excellent. But Robert Church, his own teammate, is only like 9 behind him in points. And Dane Smith had a great season. Joey Resetarits had a great season. There's the possibility of somebody like Kristen Bianco or Zach Currier even getting mentioned in that category as well. But I'm going with Matthews. He's been an MVP candidate for each of the last 3 seasons, and his stats managed to still go up this year. He set the record for most assists in a season. He scored 32 goals, 116 points, which is a career high. And as he has been doing for most of his 6-year career, he's running the rush offense. He kind of stepped back a little bit in that Robert Church had a career year and his numbers went up by 20, 25 points. But it's still the Mark Matthews show out there. And he had an outstanding season. So I'm going to go with Mark Matthews. And Melissa, why don't you go second?
All right. So I definitely agree with a lot of what you said. It probably is going to be Mark Matthews, but I want to make a case for Christian Del Bianco. I think that he is a huge reason why Calgary is sitting where they are right now. He's definitely been one of the top goalies, and he's been playing amazingly. And seriously, this kid is 20 years old. Like, wow, he's 20. I mean, are you kidding me? He's already playing so well, and yet he has most of his career ahead of him. So I don't think that Calgary would be anywhere near the playoffs without him right now. And so in that respect, I think he is our most valuable player. But yeah, it's probably going to be Mark Matthews. So what about you, Tyler?
I would like to, in the perfect world, vote for Tom Schreiber as MVP, because the Rock were 2 different teams when he played and when he did not. But in the real world, Mark Matthews gets my vote. I agree there's no clear runaway this year, but he set a record for assists. He had the most points in the league. I think those are all aspects that should be calculated up and considered and turned into an MVP award for this year. There might be somebody else who runs away with it next year, but he's got to get one at some point because he's been a dominant force. So this appears to be his year. What's next, Graham?
All right. Next, we will go with the Transition Player of the Year, and we'll shuffle things around, and we'll have Melissa go first on this one.
All right. So I have to go with Joey Cupido. We've talked about him a few times lately. He's just amazing. When he really turns it on, he's just wow to watch. And I would say this season hasn't been any different. He had a few outstanding moments, not like he has in some seasons, but he's had very consistent play. He's definitely been very instrumental in many of the Mammoths wins, and he's really made a difference. He also seems like one of the leaders on the floor. He doesn't wear the letters, but he definitely seems like he is one of those, plays that role on the floor in some respect. So I definitely like him for transition. So let's go back to Tyler then.
Alrighty. I like that pick, but I'm going to go a different direction, and I'm picking Zach Currier. Coming in as a rookie, leads the league with 200 loose balls. And he's kind of a healthy margin above anybody else. Energetic. Like he had a game against the Stealth where he had like highlight goals. He was a real spark plug for pushing the ball up in the Roughnecks games. And I don't care that he's a rookie. I think he was the best transition player of the year, and we just gave it to him right out of the gate. So I'm going with Zach Currier. Graham, who's your pick?
All right. I agree with both of those picks, actually. I had, I had Joey Capito as my number 1 pick. I actually had Zach Currier as my number 3 pick, so he's right up there as well. But Cupido is just he won Transition Player of the Year in 2015, and he had an outstanding season. He's and they've given him the nickname Lightning, which I think is new this year. I don't remember before. It's absolutely correct because the man is so fast. It's insane. He had a couple of shorthanded goals in the game against Toronto this past weekend, or sorry, the weekend before that. And yeah, just watching him play is not only just fast as he runs up the floor, he's just fast everywhere, and exciting to watch. And yeah, every time you see Dylan Ward make a save where there's no rebound, you know that he's halfway to the goal already. And so you just look back for the long outlet pass from Ward, and he's up there. So yeah, so I'm going to go with Capito as well. And we will go to Defender of the Year. And Tyler, you can start.
Graham, I pick you.
All
Graham
right.
Graham's the best Defender of the Year. Or maybe he's your cousin. Graham Hosick? Is that how many Grahams are there in Canada? In Canada,
there is probably a handful, yeah.
Half dozen. Okay. So yeah, Graham Hosick, Rochester. This year, high on the list, maybe led the league in caused turnovers. Like that's a great defender stat. High on ground balls. Not purely based on numbers. Defender of the Year is a hard one, but they have started to be able to quantify it. And nobody else really jumped out at me. Maybe Robert, not Bob Hope in Colorado. But my pick is Graham Hosick this year. And I think he won it last year. And no.
He was nominated.
The Noble kid.
It was Jason Noble, right?
Jason Noble. The Georgia one won it. But this year, he continued his growth. He's third-year player, I think, at this point, and just becoming a beast. So I'm if I had to vote, he gets it. And he gets my fake vote here. I'm going to go to you, Graham.
All right. I am actually going to pick the aforementioned Robert Hope. But once again, Graham Hosick was my second pick. And I actually did go back and forth between these two because they both had very good seasons. The only reason I went with Hope is because he was kind of thrust into the position of team captain when Dan Coates went down with an injury just a couple of weeks before the season started. And then the next day they lost Cam Holding as well. So I think a lot of people expected the Mammoth defense to be, mediocre at best because you just lost two of your best players. And Hope took over as team captain as well as kind of the de facto leader of the defense. And that's a position that he filled in Peterborough with the Lakers. So he's familiar with it. And he did an outstanding job. And then as it turned out, Colorado gave up fewer goals than anybody except the Rush. And they just had great defense all season. So the fact that Hope played really well himself was enough to get him into the top, 3 or so. But the fact that he had to take over those leadership roles and did an outstanding job at it, kind of pushed him up to the top. So I had Robert Hope. And Melissa, what did you have?
I felt bad about mine. So I have Mike Messenger. And I can't say that I have a really good reason. We've talked about it before. Defense is definitely a hard one to do because a good defensive man you don't really notice. And so that really makes it hard because when they're doing their job and they're doing their job really well, you don't necessarily notice them doing their job. But Mike Messenger, whenever I watch the Rush games, it just seems like his name comes up a lot. And so he stood out in my brain just a little bit stronger than some of the other players. And typically I'll go through and start looking at stats, things like that. But it's like, no, Mike Messenger definitely seemed to be stronger. So we'll stick with him. And it looks like we lost Graham again. So we'll go over to Tyler.
Okay. Oh, he's back. Is he still gonna be online?
I'm still here.
And we're still alive. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Tyler.
Yeah, it's a lacrosse miracle or a Hangouts miracle. So our next one is on this tab here, goalie of the year, and I'll kick this off. And I really wanted to give it to Dylan Ward because he had a stellar season. And even though he didn't play the whole season, I'm voting for Christian Del Bianco because when he came in, he righted the ship for the Roughnecks. And it's more of an MVP argument like Melissa made earlier. But I think they talked about last night, 17 assists in the games he played. Like he pushes the action, like he gets the save. He's athletic, and he'll go out, get the ball, push the action up, and cause the team to like really be better in all aspects beyond just being a wall back there. And it's kind of exciting to watch. So it's kind of living up to the hype that he had going through junior, only losing a couple of games, if that. Like 3 years, he never lost a single game in juniors. So here he's finally in the NLL, approaching the same level thing of performance. And yeah, he's young, and there's some good goalies in the league. But this year, like he was the one that was most noteworthy, so I think that makes him my goalie of the year. Melissa, who's your pick?
This one was tough, and I would say you can make an argument for any of the top four because all of them are very standout. And so those top four are Christian Del Bianco, Dylan Ward, I think Evan Kirk, and Matt Vince. And they're all very solid. And I would definitely lean towards, I would assume Christian Del Bianco's, strong choice for this one. But I put him in my MVP spot instead because, and he could win both, but he'll probably take goalie because I don't think goalies often would get MVP. But to me, he's the MVP. So I went with Dylan Ward. And I think that's, he's just been strong all season. He's been very consistent overall. And he's definitely a reason why the Mammoth are where they are. But just for the same reasons that Tyler said, and I'm sure Graham will say, Christian Del Bianco is definitely a solid choice. And so I went really back and forth. And one of the things we've definitely discussed in previous years, is it just regular season that factors into these choices, or is postseason? You hear that it's not supposed to include postseason, but how can you not include postseason, especially when Christian Del Bianco played really well, or Matt Vince played really well, so that definitely can impact it. So if playoffs are really being considered, then I would say, yeah, it's a no-brainer. You'd have to take Christian Del Bianco. If we're just looking at regular season, then I'm going to stick with Dylan Ward. What do you think, Graham?
All right. Well, I can't answer for the league. I think the idea is that the awards are supposed to be based just on the regular season. But I know for the Island or awards, Steven Stamp wanted us to get the picks to him before game time on Friday so that we were definitely making our choices based solely on the regular season and not on the playoffs, so that he wanted to have all the votes in before the playoffs even started, just to make sure that there was no hint of that, so that if somebody had an outstanding game on Friday or Saturday or a horrible game, we didn't change the numbers. My particular vote is going to be Christian Del Bianco, as you said. Now, it was amusing because, Melissa, you said the top four were Del Bianco, Ward, Kirk, and Vince. And I looked down on the top five that I handed in for Islandor, and it's Del Bianco, Ward, Kirk, and Vince in that order. So nicely done. Yeah, my pick for goalie of the year would be Del Bianco. And just like Tyler was saying, Frank Scigliano started the season and had some good moments and some not so good moments, but in general, Calgary wasn't doing very well. Then they gave the keys to Christian Del Bianco, and I believe that was against the Rock in Toronto, and he was outstanding in that game, and that changed everything for the Roughnecks. And they went on to have a pretty good season if you ignore the first 4 or 5 games before he was playing. But yeah, his numbers were the best in the league. He's exciting to watch. He's athletic. He's dynamic. And one of the things I've noticed is when they have to pull him to get an extra attacker out at the end of a quarter or for a power play or whatever, he's beating the defenders off the floor. He's running that fast in his full goalie equipment. So he's just giving his all for the team. And yeah, coming at a junior, I guess he was everybody from the West anyway. I didn't know who he was, but everybody from the West knew that this was going to be he was going to be a great goalie at some point in the NLL. And I don't know if anybody expected him to be this good this fast, but there it is. He's our pick anyway for two of the three of us for goalie of the year. And finally, we will move on to rookie of the year. And I guess I'll start this one. My pick for rookie of the year is the aforementioned Zach Currier. Usually, it seems that the transition guys don't get as much love for things like rookie of the year, and it's the guys that score all the goals who get all the credit. And Josh Byrne is certainly an excellent pick. He had an outstanding season as well. I'm only going with Currier because, as Tyler mentioned earlier, he set the loose ball record, and there's actually some controversy as to whether he's the first rookie to lead the league in loose balls or not. Part of my Stat Central column tomorrow will cover that, so I'll let you guys read that on islandor.com. So there's a bit of a plug. But Currier just had an outstanding season. Didn't make you look. He didn't look like a rookie, I guess, is part of what the Rookie of the Year award goes to, in my mind. If you look like you deserve to be there, and you're, playing at the level of a second or third year veteran in your rookie year, obviously you've adjusted to the NLL about as well as you can, and that's what we see with Currier and Byrne and a few others actually. So I'm going to go with Currier. So Melissa, you're next.
So I'm going to go with Josh Byrne. As Graham said, it's hard to ignore some of those big goal scorers. We've definitely seen a few players that they do really well their rookie season, and then they get that sophomore slump that continues. So it'll be interesting. But it's hard to argue with Josh Byrne. He had 26 goals, 37 assists. That was 63 points on the year. He broke the Bandits record that we discussed, which, kind of an asterisk next to that considering. But we did discuss that, how Keenan did it in less games. So can you truly say it was broken when he had like twice the games? But Byrne definitely made his mark this season, so it's hard to not pick him. What about you, Tyler?
I'm going to go a completely different direction, and I think recognizing the work that Jake Withers did in Rochester, coming in as a more faceoff specialist, but he can play D as well, and he had a great year for Rochester, and they would not have been, I think, where they are and won a lot of games they did without him, and kind of playing make it, take it on the games where they would go for big runs when he could have his dominant nights. I think Zach Currier, I kind of think he'll win, kind of hope he wins, but I want to not forget the great work that Jake Withers did, and I want to get that noted on the record, so that's kind of where I made my pick. I'm a little torn between those two, but watching Jake Withers step in and face off just like he'd been there, is supposed to be there, was most impressive and a good effort by him. So that was my Rookie of the Year pick. Graham, what have we got next?
All right, so those are our award choices, and we will move on to our predictions, which should be pretty quick because there's only 2 games. And what did we see? We have Melissa and I both went 2-0 last week. We both picked Rochester and Calgary. Tyler picked Rochester, but also picked Colorado, so we were now 1-1. So we are all above 500, or at 500, so that's pretty good. And we have the division finals coming up this weekend. We have Rochester in Georgia, and we have Calgary in Saskatchewan. And just for something different, I'm going to go first myself. Normally we let Melissa go first because she's kicking our butts the whole season. So this time we're all at 0. Well, Melissa and I are both at 2-0, so I'm going to grab the reins myself here. Rochester and Georgia, I'm going to go with Rochester. This was a tough one. I really went back and forth in this one for a while because Georgia is starting to look like the Swarm that we saw last year, who were mostly unbeatable. I actually thought the Rush were going to beat them in the final, but they came back and not even came back. They dominated the finals as well. So this year's Swarm is starting to look like last year's Swarm, which means you should vote for Georgia. But Rochester seems to be one of those peaking at the right times kind of thing, that they didn't have a great start to the season and they were kind of inconsistent here and there. But they ended fairly strong. Matt Vince is playing like Matt Vince 4 or 5 years ago when he was winning all those Goalie of the Year awards. And they just look really good. So I'm going to go with Rochester on that one. Calgary, Saskatchewan. I think this is the same as the previous couple of years. Whenever anybody's playing Saskatchewan, you go with Saskatchewan. Not that Calgary can't beat them, but something that we said, I think, earlier in the season was that Saskatchewan expected to win the title last year and were kind of surprised and shocked that Georgia came to beat them. And they have no intention of letting that happen again this year. So I'd be kind of scared to be facing the Rush. And I think the Rush will take it. They're at home. They have a loud barn, as we all know. And so I think that will go in the direction of the Rush. So, Melissa, you're next.
All right. So, funny enough, Graham and I have the same picks. Rochester and Georgia was a tough one. I'm going to go with Rochester partially because, as Tyler said earlier, going into a game with confidence is really important factor. They're coming off a really big win. They looked really good. They're playing Georgia, which they played several times. And I want to say they've dominated Georgia. So they have that going for them. But just like New England with Rochester, that doesn't always mean anything. But Georgia definitely has had some inconsistent moments. They looked really good last weekend. Just not sure about them. So I'm going to go with Rochester because I think they're going to carry that momentum. And with Calgary and Saskatchewan, I'm going to go with the Rush. I think the Rush are just a better team in general. Calgary could definitely come out and beat them because, like I said earlier, in the playoffs, Calgary is a whole different beast. And it seems like no matter who's on the team, who's coaching, Calgary just is a beast in the playoffs. That's the way it is. So you definitely can't underestimate them. And if the Rush do, they're probably going to be on the wrong end. But I don't think they're going to do that. The Rush have just been on fire, and they've just been the top team. It's really hard to argue with them. So I have Rochester and Rush. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat the phrase around Rochester and Georgia. It's a tough game to pick. But I'm going to go with Georgia. The week of rest probably pretty helpful. They've been on a tear since they settled into having the key players from last season return of Jordan Hall and Joel White. So it's probably, I think they'll both be super exciting games. I don't know if this will be the most exciting game, but this is going to be a great game. And I'm going to pick Georgia to win it because they're at home and they're rested. Other game, Calgary at Saskatchewan. I'm going with the Rush because they're the Rush. They have the history. They the more dominant offense, like player for player on offense. Calgary has a couple of great players. They're nothing compared to what the Rush can put out on the floor. And then, again, the Rush defense is a much more solid unit than the Roughnecks. Roughnecks could steal away the game. Like they had this weird purpose to them in the second half. Like when Curtis Dixon scored the empty net goal, he was kind of like emotional afterwards. Like, you've done this before. Like, why? What's special now? I don't know what's going on there. That interests me. And if it's a driving factor for the Roughnecks, they could sneak away with a win. But that shouldn't happen. That's not what I expect to happen. So I'm picking the Rush to win there. And those are my picks for the week.
All right. So we had everybody's picking the Rush to beat Calgary, though I think I echo what Tyler said. Nobody would be completely shocked if Calgary were to win that game, but if we were to put money on it, I think we'd all be going for the Rush. And we're kind of split between Rochester and Georgia in a game that should be pretty darn exciting. So we're looking forward to that. And we will be back next Sunday to talk about those games. So until then, this has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for listening. We will see you next week.